Imagine standing on a windswept hill in Caesarea Philippi nearly 2,000 years ago. Around you are ancient shrines to pagan gods carved into the very rock of the earth. In the middle of this landscape of shifting beliefs, a carpenter from Nazareth turns to a rugged fisherman and says words that would alter the course of human history forever. "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church."
But did Jesus really mean what the Catholic Church has taught for 20 centuries? Or was it, as some argue, a simple play on words that we have misunderstood? Today, we are diving deep into the massive stone foundations of our faith to see if the papacy is a divine appointment or a historical invention.
Meet Julian. Julian is a bright 30-year-old history teacher with a sharp mind and a restless heart. He grew up in a small town, attending a community church where the Bible was the only map he was ever given. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Julian sat in a coffee shop across from his old college friend.
Julian leaned forward, his voice hushed but intense. "Adrian," he said, "I love the Bible, but I can't find the Pope in it. My pastor says Jesus was the rock and Peter was just a small stone. If the foundation is wrong, doesn't the whole house of the Catholic Church fall down?"
Julian's question is one that echoes in the hearts of thousands of searchers. Is the leadership of the Catholic Church a burden of man-made tradition, or is it the structural integrity Jesus promised to keep his followers united? Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments what you were taught about this topic in your church or parish.
To answer Julian, we have to travel back to the 1st century after Christ. In the early days of the church, there was no confusion about who led the 12 apostles. Whenever a list of the apostles is written in the New Testament, Peter's name is always first.
But as the church grew and spread from Jerusalem to the corners of the Roman Empire, the need for a visible center of unity became vital. By the 2nd century after Christ, early Christian writers like St. Irenaeus of Lyons were already pointing to the church in Rome.
Irenaeus, writing around the year 180 after Christ, famously argued that every church must agree with the Church of Rome because of its superior origin and its foundation by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul. In the 4th century after Christ, when the Roman persecutions ended, the role of the successor of Peter became even more visible. It was not a grab for power, but a response to crisis.
When heresies threatened to tear the meaning of Jesus apart, the bishops looked to the chair of Peter to settle the storm. This was not a new idea invented by Constantine. It was the unfolding of a seed planted by Christ himself in the soil of Galilee.
The historical record shows a consistent line of bishops in Rome, reaching back to the fisherman who died on a cross, upside down, on the Vatican Hill. To truly understand the rock, we must look at the geography of the promise. Jesus didn't choose a random location. He took the apostles to the base of Mount Hermon.
There stood a massive wall of rock where a temple to the god Pan was located. It was a place of deep spiritual significance. When Jesus said he would build his church on a rock, the apostles weren't thinking about a metaphor. They were looking at a literal, massive stone foundation.
In the Bible, a name change signifies a new identity and a massive mission. Abram became Abraham in the 19th century before Christ. Jacob became Israel in the 18th century before Christ. When Jesus looks at Simon and calls him Cephas, which is Aramaic for rock, he is doing something unprecedented.
In the Greek translation, we see the words Petros and Petra. Protestant critics often claim that Petros means a small stone, while Petra means a massive rock. However, in the Koine Greek of the 1st century after Christ, this distinction was largely academic. More importantly, Jesus spoke Aramaic. In Aramaic, Jesus would have said, "You are Kephas, and on this Kephas I will build my church." There is no linguistic wiggle room here. The man and the rock are one and the same in the eyes of the king. Furthermore, Jesus gives Peter the keys of the kingdom. This isn't just a poetic phrase about opening the door to the gospel.
It is a direct reference to the ancient Davidic kingdom.
In the book of Isaiah, chapter 22, which takes place in the 8th century before Christ, we see the king of Israel appointing a prime minister, Eliakim, to handle the palace affairs while the king is away. The prime minister was given the key of the house of David.
When Jesus uses this specific imagery, he is telling the 12 apostles that while he is the eternal king, Peter is being appointed as his royal steward on earth. Peter is given the power to bind and loose, a Jewish legal phrase that meant the authority to make binding decisions for the community.
Energetic, suspenseful, and engaging. If Peter were just one of the guys, why would he receive the keys alone in this passage? Why would the keys, the symbol of the highest office under the king, be placed in his hands specifically? This is the biblical blueprint for the papacy.
If this were a Catholic invention from the Middle Ages, we wouldn't see it in the writings of the men who lived immediately after the apostles. Consider Saint Clement of Rome, who was the 4th bishop of Rome, writing around the year 96 after Christ. When a dispute broke out in the church at Corinth, it was Clement, not the Apostle John, who was still alive and much closer, who wrote an authoritative letter to settle the matter.
The early church recognized that the rock was an office that carried authority. Saint Cyprian of Carthage, in the 3rd century after Christ, wrote that on Peter Jesus builds the church, and although he assigns a like power to all the apostles, yet he founded a single chair to establish the source of unity.
Even the most ancient liturgies from the 2nd century after Christ and 3rd century after Christ include prayers for the chair of Peter. This is not the language of a symbolic stone. This is the language of a foundation that was active and recognized across the Mediterranean world. We also see this Petrine primacy in the way Peter acts in the book of Acts. In the 1st century after Christ, it is Peter who stands up at Pentecost to preach the first sermon. It is Peter who decides to admit the first Gentiles into the church.
It is Peter who speaks first at the Council of Jerusalem to settle the debate about circumcision. Even when St. Paul corrects Peter in Antioch, Paul recognizes Peter's importance. He went to Jerusalem specifically to consult with Peter for 15 days before beginning his ministry.
Paul doesn't challenge the office. He challenges a specific behavior, proving that the man can be weak while the office remains divine. If this is helping you understand your faith more clearly, leave a like and share it with someone who has the same question, so this message reaches more people.
A common objection is the claim that Jesus is the only foundation, citing 1 Corinthians chapter 3. The argument suggests that if Peter is the rock, we are replacing Jesus. But the Catholic Church teaches that Peter is the rock only because he participates in the authority of Christ. Think of it like a light bulb.
The bulb gives off light, but it only does so because it is plugged into the power source. Peter is the rock because Christ, the living stone, willed it to be so. Another myth is that Peter was too sinful to be the head.
But this is exactly why the papacy is a miracle. God uses weak men to show that the church is kept together by His power, not by human genius. If the papacy were a human invention, it would have collapsed under the weight of bad popes in the 10th century after Christ or the 15th century after Christ.
But it stands today, 2,000 years later, because the gates of hell were forbidden from prevailing against it. What does this mean for us today, in 2026?
It means we don't have to reinvent the wheel of faith every morning. Having a rock means having a home. Take the story of a man named Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant theology student who spent years studying the great apostasy theory. He was taught that the church became evil when it allied with the state in the 4th century after Christ. But Marcus had a problem. He couldn't find a single year in history where the papacy didn't exist or where the true Christians rejected the Bishop of Rome. He realized that if the papacy was a man-made corruption, then Christ's promise had failed for over a millennium. Marcus eventually walked into a Catholic parish and felt the weight of history fall off his shoulders. He realized that the Pope exists so that the little ones of the flock,
don't get lost in the confusion of modern opinions. For Marcus, the papacy became a source of peace. He knew that when he listened to the official teaching of the church, he was hearing the echo of that voice in Caesarea Philippi. Think about the sheer impossibility of the papacy. No other human institution has lasted this long.
Empires like Rome, the Ottomans, and the British have risen and fallen, yet the office of the fisherman remains. This is not because Catholics are smarter or more organized. It is because Jesus is faithful to his word. When a storm hits a building, the only thing that matters is the foundation.
If the foundation is solid rock, the house stands. If the foundation is the shifting sand of individual interpretation, the house falls. The papacy is the divine anchor that keeps the ship of the church from drifting into the rocks of heresy and division. It is the visible sign that God is still with us, providing a shepherd for the flock. Jesus did not leave us as orphans. He knew that the winds of doctrine and the storms of history would try to scatter his sheep. By building his church on St. Peter, he gave us a gift of unity that has survived everything the world could throw at it. The papacy is not a human invention. It is a divine safety net. Whether you are a searching teacher like Julian, a curious student like Marcus, or someone looking for a home, the rock is still there, inviting you to build something that lasts for eternity.
Does the idea of a visible head of the church make you feel more secure or more challenged? Do you think unity is possible without a central authority?
In the description, you will find another video where I go even deeper into a related topic. Watch it next so you can keep growing in your Catholic formation and not stop with just this explanation. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of the church.